From our studios in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip. I'm joined as always by my co-host Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. On Green Tag, we break down the week's top news and explain why it matters to industry professionals. And we are both back from our trip through Asia. So this week, we're going to discuss takeaways from IAAPA Asia and also the opening of Legoland Shanghai.
Cool. Yes, I wish I'd been able to go to IAAPA Asia. I missed it by like one day. It ended and I landed in Hong Kong the next day. So
yes. Yeah. So I was at IAAPA Asia and did the trip through Shanghai, and Scott was also in Asia working with a client so we got to see a lot of the mainland attractions from different cities, basically.
Yes, I was in Zhuhai and Guangzhou.
Yeah, and I was in Shanghai and Shenzhen. So we have a nice sampling here to talk about. And of course, we had different interpreters and wholly different experiences. So we can kind of wrap that into the context as we discuss this week's news. So let's start off with some numbers from IAAPA Asia. IAAPA Asia, it says here that they welcomed over 7,000 verified attendees with 5,600 qualified buyers and 300 exhibiting companies from 85 countries. And of course, during the event itself, I went to all of the pre-shows, but there was the pre-show tour of Legoland Shanghai before it opened to the public. So we got to see it before it opened to the public. There was also a tour, EDU tour of Legoland, of Disneyland, Shanghai Disneyland, where we got to see the show, the new show they have there, as well as the kitchen tours and do that kind of stuff. And then there was the after party, the opening ceremony at Shanghai Disneyland, where they did a partial, not a shutdown, but like a mix in with a dedicated food and beverage area. And then of course they had the multiple days of the show itself. So quite a few activities planned for the regions around. And of course the Monday, so they had the opening reception where of course you, as usual, you bring in samplings of local culture and discussions of attractions coming in the local area and local investment. And then the leadership breakfast was on the second day in the morning. And the leadership breakfast was led by Jill Estorino, which is the president and managing director for Disney Parks International. So we got a nice sampling. We got to hear from Jill about some of her experiences working in Asia and how it works differently and what's going on with the operations there. That was day 2. And day 1, during the opening ceremony, you got to hear about the planned investment for the area. And then before it even started, we got to see Legoland and we got to learn about some of the operations at the Disneyland park. Yeah, so let's see.
So
how should we do this? Any questions, discussion? How should we go through?
The first question that comes in my mind is because Jill. So it's interesting. I was doing work at Chamlong Spaceship in Zhuhai, and in a pre-show of one of the big shows there, they did a whole video on the visit from members of IAAPA. And it included Jill and Masi and Jakob, all the IAAPA folk, and it was really interesting because they were all talking about how there's a certain vibrancy in China specifically, and of course they were very complimentary of Mr. Su and the Ocean Kingdom that's in Zhuhai and Chamlong Spaceship. But what did Jill, is there anything that you captured from Jill that was specific and unique about the China market and the expanding China market right now?
So I want to say yes and no at the same time. And what I mean by that is yes, in that there are unique elements that differ from what we would see in the American parks, but no, in that every region tends to have its own differences, right? The way things work in Europe, the way things work in the Middle East, as we've talked about ad nauseum on the show, each area I think has its uniqueness. So it's not different in that it is normal, in that it has a difference there. Interesting, this is a good way to do it. So let's pair learnings I had from the Edu tour with some stuff Jill said.
Okay.
We can kind of talk about both of them. So
great.
Jill talked about the F&B at the park and how it was different. But she didn't give too many examples other than the popsicles in Zootopia that are from the film, right? In the opening credits, he's taking the big, melting it down, and then he's making that. So you can buy those little animal pops in the park. And she talked about that and other food and beverage and how different it is. On the Edu tour, we got to tour the kitchens at Disneyland, and we got to see it firsthand. And the thing that is so different as opposed to other facilities, there are so many things, but mostly it's that they are cooking everything for the resort there. And it's not being like in America, where especially the smaller regional parks, you have things like bread that's frozen, it's brought in, then it's reheated, or you have patties or whatnot. Everything is there. And they have a whole workflow where even areas of the kitchen have like doors that close and you can't go back out because you're not supposed to walk from like a raw meat into a vegetable area, right? So you kind of have to lock those areas because they're cooking literally everything. And they have even banana specialists, for example, that specialize in being able to sort bananas according to their lengths, because they send different, you can't just send it to one restaurant, right? So one whole location will have this length of banana so that someone doesn't see a different size banana and feel like they got a different value. And so you get this, that's a big, things like that are a big, like the uniformity, and also having to cook things there from scratch, because that is the norm in Asia, is that you have much more fresh food that is readily available, that is cooked from scratch. And the whole idea is, why would you go into a theme park and get food that is worse than what you could get outside? The value, the perceived value, again, like the banana thing, that perceived value is very important, right? Especially when you're comparing it. Well, how come,
Well, and it's interesting because it's also very much, it also echoes the way for many years many socialist countries actually did everything in their country. There was a centralized location that did everything the same way, and then distributed that out to different areas. So it makes sense. It's parallel to the way that they're used to working in China specifically. It also is interesting that they recognize, we've talked about creature comfort over and over again, but they recognize that the culinary experience is not just sustenance that's grab and go. It is a part of the quality of the overall day. And by
Correct.
creating fresh food as opposed to, and another reason for that too, I'm assuming, and I don't know this for fact, but I'm assuming there's also fewer preservatives in the food that's coming in.
Yes,
so the
100%.
food itself doesn't last as long. So
Correct.
It's got to be cooked fresh. It can't be frozen because it doesn't, or left on a shelf because it doesn't have the shelf life that some of the American products would have.
Right. And it also gives them a little bit more control, which is something Jill talked about, but I think seeing it helped it reinforce it to me. So, for example, they also have vegetable specialists that carve Mickey's into vegetables. And that is not something you do in the US, because not only is the labor more expensive, so having someone to carve that is not, tenable for our stuff, but also a lot of the vegetables are made in master kitchens, and you order them from Cisco, and you just receive it from Cisco, right? And then you just kind of store it and you put it into it. So it's I'm not saying that we don't have restaurants that make things from ingredients, but it's just different in that everything, right? Everything for everything, like they're baking the turkey legs. And he explained how these kitchens operate actually 24 hours a day. So he was showing us when we were there in the afternoon, they were already stocking up all sorts of pantries for to be able to serve the food in the morning. Like they were already working on the next day's morning food service now, where they would cook all night basically and just roll them into cold storage, and they would roll them out and disperse them throughout the park. So it's a whole system, right? That's very different. They also mentioned that they pilot some of the new food safety procedures there that to then roll out to other places. So they actually have a testing lab on property, where they take samples of food and they take it over, and the results are shared with the government almost in real time. And they have this testing burden, which was interesting because in my group, I don't think this is telling stories at school, but in my group, there was a few people there who pointed out that that is not that's great that they're doing this, but it's also, it creates, it makes it harder for smaller places that don't have the ability to invest all this into testing and invest. And so it's almost like it's building a moat. So it's one of those things that is like an example of something that sounds really great to do, but then it creates a moat that protects, people that are already entrenched, which I don't think that anybody understood on the tour. But
Well,
that's kind
and
of
I
what you're
guess
saying.
and I guess my question is, because these findings are going to the government, does that mean that the government in turn makes regulations for those people who don't have the ability to meet those standards? Does it impact them, or is it just for informational purposes? That I
I
don't.
think it's the form. It is the first one where
So
you
they're
are
actually going to
in.
make standardization rules and
Yeah.
regulations so that you must have specific holding temperatures, and I'm making this
Yes.
up, but specific
Correct.
holding temperatures, specific cooling
Yeah.
temperatures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's funny because
Yeah.
not even I didn't get a chance to go into the kitchens in the theme parks that I was working in, but just in the restaurant in the hotel where I was staying, there were oh gosh, at least eight to 10 chefs working in the buffets to
Mhm.
make, making dumplings, making noodles, making, cooking large pieces of meat in various forms, carving ham off the bone for you. It wasn't as though anything was prepackaged.
Correct.
Everything was made for you. Even down to the beautiful little steamed buns that are all in shapes like that.
Yes.
Every morning I had to have my hedgehog bun, because it was just
Yep.
adorable. So yeah, it's a very different approach for Americans who are used to, we get good food, but it's all prepackaged and was probably made, as you say, in the Cisco kitchens in another state.
Labor is so cheap as
Mhm.
compared to the US that you're able to, in a way, add extra people in to a lot of areas to do more of this. So like where in the US we're much more thinking about automation and using AI and using robots and doing all this kind of stuff. That stuff does exist in China as well in the factory cities. But when it comes to this type of food thing, you can afford to have all these people cutting
Right.
Mickeys into vegetables, and you can afford to have these so much extra labor with security and just people standing around to help you move places, and all this is just because the labor cost is very different
Yeah,
than it is in the US.
we're looking for, in the U.S. we're looking for efficiencies to reduce labor, and there that's not necessary because
They're
they're
looking
looking
to
to
employ
employ people.
people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Yep. Yep.
an interesting point, and a very interesting point of difference too, because I noticed that as well. That it wasn't that you'd walk in and you'd see the automatic dumpling maker, spitting things out and dropping them into boiling water. No, these were all being made by hand, and you'd see them made by hand and passed off to the other guy. Yeah, it was. You're absolutely right. It's a different mindset, and because, and I guess it comes down to what your resources are. If you're in an environment where the resources are human and labor, uh,
Yep.
then take full advantage of that. That makes total
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. We going back then to Jill's presentation, Jill spoke a lot about the Zootopia land because of course Zootopia, it's a unique area there in that it's not available in the U.S. parks, the zoo,
Right.
the size of Zootopia, the ride they have there, and it's also one that is, I think, according to her, not uniquely Asian, but it's one of those areas where the IP is much more popular in Asia than some of the other
Right.
IPs, and so they justify the investment in it. And she did speak about how they did some stuff there they wouldn't do other places because of it, like how they made it much more social media friendly, how they changed it over for Christmas, how they add in kind of like food with local flavor and try to work it in to the themed land. And she kind of gave also examples about how the demographic is different in those areas. So she said, like, for example, the young adult female has taken hold of this brand and of this park, and they're creating a sophisticated energy inside the park. They bring their fashion sensibility, their modern perspectives, and their technology capability. The park has become not only a backdrop for their WeChat, which we talked a lot about making sure there's backdrops in that Zootopia specifically, but they're also creating a vibe in the park. And she talked about the flower shop, which Disney Imagineers recreated as a facade in the new land, complete with plants and props to make the store appear believable in all guests, in all the selfies and all of the social media stuff. And then, of course, the food, she goes into the food and all that. So I think, again, that's an area where like that is unique to the China market, but you see every region has a thing like
Right.
that where they have some sort of differentiator. But that was specifically she talked about in her talk about Zootopia and about all those things. Then she also talked about the Duffy and Friends and the expansion of that, where they're not characters here in the US, but they debuted in Tokyo 20 years ago. And to date, there's 500 million in annual merch sales. So 500 million each year for Duffy and Friends. It's so popular that they even made a Duffy month that is a special event that happens in September, and it boosts attendance by more than 50%. They've added a Stella buffet, which is Stella's one of the new characters in Duffy. They do Enjoy the Moon activities with Duffy and Friends. They also have been introducing new characters into the Duffy franchise, but like those characters, obviously, since they don't have a movie that come from, it's generated from the park. So the story of those characters is told by the marketing team.
Right.
And then told then using local. So they kind of, it's almost like designed for local. So specifically Stella is the one that they've made, and Stella and Lena Bell are designed as the kind of young, sophisticated, fashionable woman who is that resonates with the audience there, because it's mostly that audience there. The young woman in Asia defining who they want to be is how they described it. So they said merch usually sells out in 2 hours. and that they in Asia, they say the bear that started it all.
So that's funny. So it's interesting because in the Hong Kong airport, there is a Disneyland Hong Kong store. And I would say 3/4 of the merchandise there is Duffy and Friends.
Yep, exactly.
It's not.
Yep.
Yes, they have some of the traditional, or what we think of in the U.S. as the more traditional characters of Mickey, Minnie, Donald, but 3/4 of it is Duffy and Friends, and that includes plush. One of the things that they did talk about, though, in the parks in Zhuhai is that they have trouble identifying how the merchandise sales are going, because with merchandise, the Chinese audience apparently buys very differently than the American audience does, and I think it's funny that you say that the Duffy merchandise sells out so very quickly, but the only thing I can think of is it's simply because it is their merchandise.
The resonance.
It's resonant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
their merchandise.
It's their merchandise. It's not I'm buying something from some other country or some other park. It is specifically from the Chinese market for the Chinese people.
Yep. Yeah, because what I heard also, we heard this a few times at the merch area. So that was a big takeaway for me. The first item was a big takeaway in terms of basically them needing, even with a brand as strong as Disney, with the IP as strong as Disney, they still need to develop something for the local region, and that local item they're really leaning into. And then they find a way to work that then into some of the new lands and the new areas they're doing. So again, it's brilliant by Disney, but it also just demonstrates that you need to kind of meet the audience and meet that local thing where it is. And then when it comes to the merch sales, what we heard from the merchandising team when we toured that is that I think sometimes Americans have a perception that China is cheap, and it's more accurate to say that China is obsessed with value at every level. And so it's the banana thing, it's the food thing, it's all this. And so if you're going to make merchandise, it needs to be of value. So maybe because they love Stella, they'll get the Stella stuff. But when it's a Mickey thing or a backpack or this or that, like, it has to be nice according to the price, right? So it has to appear to be a good value. You're like, I guess you're not buying it just because it's theme park merchandise,
Right.
right? You make decisions based off of value, effectively. Right. And that's why they have a lot of merch that is not done in the US, because in the US we need certain profit margins, right, for all of our stuff. And that's, I think, less important there, as much it's more concern of the value, it's less a concern of the profit margin in particular. So
yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, again, it's quality of product, and not just the quality of the product that you're experiencing while you're at the park, but the quality of the product that you take home as well, or the quality of the product that you consume while you're there. So it's
correct.
It's interesting because in the U.S., and we've talked about this a lot, as far as the culinary side goes, is there are certain parks that do culinary incredibly well. There
Yep.
are, but the vast majority of parks here in the U.S. at least think of culinary as an afterthought. It's
Yep.
almost like, well, we got to feed them so they don't leave. So,
Yep.
and more of
Well,
their,
we talked about that just with Six Flags
yes,
recently, right?
exactly,
Saying that, and it's just so funny that they're like, it's like they're finally coming to the realization that food is important, but like it's been like this in other areas for a long time.
right,
And yeah, in that ways, it's almost like the American is less of value in a way in some of these dimensions where food wasn't previously thought of as critical for the value proposition, but it clearly
yeah,
is,
yeah.
and merchandise. Yeah.
I also want to talk just a
So
little bit about you. You mentioned the idea of creating those environments for in essence the content creator. One of the things about that I saw in Chomlong Spaceship and in Ocean Kingdom is it is set up first and foremost as a selfie museum. I mean,
yeah, it's a big.
it provides atmosphere after atmosphere, environment after environment to capture images and the number one activity as I'm watching guests, because I watch the guests as much as I watch the experience itself. The number of guests who the vast majority of their day seem to be spent taking photographs of themselves in these cool environments or in front of unique things
Yeah.
and posting them, whether it was still photos or video images or whatever. So that's a very interesting thing that is important here in the U.S., but it is a target. It's a specific design target for things in China, at least based on my experience.
Yep. Well, down that vein, and pairing that with the idea of quality, I did want to talk about the tour of Legoland Shanghai Resort. So we got to tour it early, as I mentioned, as part of IAAPA Asia, and it did already open. And we got the press release here saying that it's 318 square meters. The brand new theme park and hotel destination will invite guests to immerse themselves into 8 lands filled with over 75 interactive rides, shows, and attractions, as well as explore thousands of Lego models built more than 85 million Lego bricks. Let's see, 10,000 workers worked on the project with 300 teams from 15 countries. So let me just say, this resort is incredible. I mean, the quality of Legoland Shanghai, it left me absolutely shocked. Like I was actually like flabbergasted. Like, um, and even people that know me there on the tour was surprised that I was like so like thought it was so good. But it's
Yeah, because you don't think anything's good. So
no, that's
so
true. It's true. It's true. It was yeah, true. It was like I was. I mean, if you look closely, like when you look at the theatrical show, they have a stage show there. You're like, kind of like squinting. You're like, that's. I mean, they could be better, right? All these things could be better. But the theming, again, the backdrops, the places for photos, the backdrops, the theming, it was all excellent. The food. I mean, everything is Lego food. If you buy a sandwich, it comes with Lego print with Lego bread, like bread shaped like a Lego brick that is then cut in half with a sandwich in the middle of it. You got all these same elements, and so it's the biggest Legoland property anywhere, and I think it's incredible. The rides are incredible, just everything, just A to Z. It's very very good. The service I thought was actually better at Legoland than at Disney, and I heard later a little bit more about how that it's kind of like in this way Disney was the pioneer. So all of the stuff starts at Disney, like the training, the service, and that whole thing has to trickle out from there. So yeah, I think the big takeaway for me was just in seeing like, oh, there is a market, for this type of development. And I think it's one thing for us to read the news on the show, which we do, where the news about the investment and the opportunity in China and all those stuff. But then, you always think, well, what level of immersion are they really going for, right? Like, are they ready for the full DMX controllable lighting sequences and shows and this and that, or is it just like something that's a lower tier, like a Six Flags or a Merlin property or something? And I'm not sure if they're ready for another Disneyland or another Universal somewhere, but definitely these more regional brands, or whatever the next step under brands, are excellent quality at this. And you do have a lot of, and also the when I went to Demand, I was thinking about Demand. So it's clear they want to make Legoland approachable to families. They talked to us about that. So the pricing's different for that. But Disneyland was sold out, and it was not cheap. And it was sold out. Most of the days I was there, it was completely sold out at fairly high ticket prices. And so I do think that, again, just like similar to the U.S., there are people that have money. I mean, yes, a lot of them do not. The middle class but there's an opportunity on both ends, similar to how here there's opportunity for the more luxury items and the really good theming. And I think there's also a market for more value, family-friendly approaches.
But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that generally speaking, Chinese people are value conscious.
Yes.
So as long as the perceived value is worth the amount that they are spending, then you're right. They're clearly, I mean, obviously with Disneyland being sold out, they're not going to back away from a product that they feel has a certain level of value for the cost. With Legoland, it's interesting because you mentioned Legoland service. You thought was actually better than Disney, and yep. I would go so far as to say that's true in most markets where there is both a Lego and a Disney. I think the same is true in Orlando. I think that the Legoland has a certain mentality because they are the whole mentality in working in any of the Legoland parks. And I did one very small project, one very teeny tiny project for them once. But it's all about connecting with the audience in a hands-on way, and that mentality, that what's the word I'm looking for? That sort of environment for their employees leads to better guest service because it encourages them to really pay attention to making certain that the guests have what they need. And if you think about it, it's the same way they would interact with children playing at a Lego table, to make sure that they had the blocks and
yep.
bricks they need to find that mentality of, do you have what you need? Are you happy? Are you comfortable? Can I get you anything? Just sort of sounds like it spills over into the way they serve their food, the way they, greet guests, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're much more engaged with the guest experience as opposed
yep.
to, they're part of the guest experience as opposed to providing the guest experience. And I know that's a subtle difference, but being engaged with it, I think, makes for better customer service overall. And
yep.
and that is kind of in the Lego, just the Lego vernacular, the Lego way of doing things, no matter where the Lego park is. And because of the size of this one and the newness of this one, one of the things that has always impressed me about Lego is each time they do a new park, it gets better. I've seen some of the early parks and some of the later, and they just keep improving each time they install, because they recognize, they really look at what the guest experience is. And it may be because they're engaged with it, they're involved with it, and they want the guests to actually participate. And if they are participating with the guests, they have a better understanding of what the guests like, what the guests don't like, and it just keeps getting better and better and better and better. And it sounds like this is the most recent point on the pencil. This is the new crowning achievement for Lego, and that's great. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in the Asian market right now. And in this show, we were able to share Philip's notes from both IAAPA and his experience at Legoland Shanghai. What we're going to do in Unhinged is to talk a little bit about the business side, because doing business in China is very, very different than doing business in the United States. And we've both had experience, obviously, both with Gantom and the theme parks, and then I'm just starting to tap into that market. And so we're gonna kind of dive into that in Unhinged. So hopefully you'll be able to find us on Unhinged and join us there. But if not, we'll see you again here next week. On behalf of Philip Hernandez and myself, Scott Swenson, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30, and we will see you next week.